So, after listening to this video, the first point that she uh, was discussing was in 1960, uh, people invested in 25 pieces of clothing um, every single year, which I thought was like still a high number for that year. I mean, clothes are always popular. Like there's always a certain fashion in every single year. Like each year, like there's a new sort of fashion. Like every 10 years, there seems to be a new style. But then she said that nowadays we buy 3 times that amount of clothing, and that honestly, I personally think like that makes perfect sense to me because to me personally, the uh, clothing is like a big part of everybody. They like to have the nicest clothes. They want to like fit in. Basically, the clothes that you wear is almost like a status symbol to people. Like if you're not wearing like expensive clothes, you can't hang out with this group or you're not amongst the elite in society. But if you are, then like if you're wearing like super nice fancy clothes, like some people like they might not even be able to afford those clothes but still buy them because they want people to look at them and say he has a lot of money. So I think now that we're buying 3 times that amount of clothing from the 1960s, that I can see that being very true. Then she talked about the cheap labor trend in business. This, as a business major, I understand why businesses want to find the cheapest labor possible and outsource it to other companies, but I don't agree with the fact that most of the cheap labor that they go with, they don't have very good, I guess, a work environment, a very great work environment for the people that are working in these businesses because they don't get as many benefits as a lot of workers do. That's in America, but in other like third world countries, they'll have these like sweatshops, so to speak, and they just keep uh, making them make all these different like all of their products for like very little cost and not paying them very much. And going along with the whole we buy 3 times as much as we did in the 1960s, 10% of salaries spent on clothing in the US. This was very eye opening. 10% does not sound like a lot, but when you think about it, that is a lot of clothes, especially when you can buy clothes for very cheap nowadays. But that also just depends on the type of clothes that you like to wear. You can either wear the high end, very expensive clothing, like designer clothes, like Gucci and Versace, things like that. Or you can wear just like the cheaper, I guess, cheaper brands. Not saying that Nike and Adidas are very cheap brands, but they're cheaper than designer brands, where you might buy the off-brand clothing of a certain like item. Like instead of buying a Nike item, you buy the off-brand version of it. And then she gets into her main point about clothing, which is the new trend of polyester clothing. Now, what she says polyester is, which I wasn't really sure what polyester was, I just knew it was a part of clothing, is that it's non-biodegradable, which is something I did not know about polyester. And every time they get washed, small particles of like plastic particles get into the water and also the fish. And there was a study, I forget what the percentage was, but it was a fairly decent percentage of fish that fishermen were catching had these polyester plastic particles inside of them, which obviously we catch the fish, then we eat the fish, so obviously those particles are getting into us. And that polyester is not breathable. I can believe that. You see, whenever I work out, I'll be wearing a sweatshirt that's most likely polyester based on the statistics of how much polyester is going into our clothing nowadays. And it's you do sweat a lot whenever you wear polyester clothing. It's just you feel very like the heat just stays trapped. Like if you're working out like I do in a sweatshirt, I'll be running in a sweatshirt. It stays trapped. It doesn't like leave. It's almost like I'm basically running inside of a sauna, essentially. Um, Next thing she talked about was the new standard for businesses, which is user centered design, use natural materials, and work with suppliers. So work with the suppliers and not tend to turn to the cheap labor option. Actually work with uh, who is actually making your clothing, so they don't so like you can actually make sure like are these people in this that we're outsourcing to being treated correctly like we would treat people in our business. And the open door uh, policy, which is just you know letting everybody in the company and customers like having a like or basically having all people in the company have a say in what goes on in the business. Um, then at the and then she goes into her last point, which is the citizen consumer. What this is, she has a couple steps to what us as buyers of clothing can look at to prevent this, this pollution of plastic particles from polyester getting into the water and the fish, obviously harming them, and just to save a little bit more money on like buying clothing, like actually buying something that you truly want. So the first step she says is check the tags. So basically just look at the tag of your clothing. What is it made out of? Like is it made of polyester? Like after listening to what she has to say, are you okay with polyester? Or do you want to just buy 100% cotton clothing from now on? Check the seams. This is something I actually did not know, is that whenever you're buying clothing, you can flip the clothing inside out and you can check the seams of the clothing because a lot of times, whenever you are buying clothing, they could be sitting there for a long time and the seams of the clothing could already be deteriorating and falling apart. That's something I really did not know. I could actually start doing that from now on when I buy clothes. Third step is just love what you buy. So look at whenever you're going shopping and you see something that you like, you want to actually look at it as how often am I going to wear this? Is the price of this piece of clothing uh, worth it? Like, am I going to wear this once and never touch it again, or am I going to be wearing this multiple times throughout the years? And then the fourth question is just to ask brand questions. You obviously have the right to ask questions about what you're buying, and you have the right to know what is going, like, what is your product made of? Where is your product coming from? things like that. And then you have the cost per wear. So what you have to look at here is basically the cost per wear is thinking about it as like looking at the price and basically seeing how much, like how many times are you going to wear this throughout the year. And that is all that I have to say about this video. I thought it was a very great video, and thanks for watching.